Well, welcome to Kramer Talk. I'm Robert Kramer. This is where we go beyond product announcements to explore the people, the ideas, and the experiences that are shaping the future of enterprise technology. One of the things I like to talk about is technology may drive transformation, but people drive technology. And Kramer Talk is where these stories are told. I have a really great person here today, Shashi Bellamkonda. I hope I said your name right. We are just really good peers, and it's fun to see you when I do travel, and great to have you on the show. How we doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me on the show, Robert. And we share such a fantastic, similar background. I always enjoy it when we are on calls or when we meet in real life when we travel. So appreciate being on the show.
No, thank you. It's so funny. We were talking before about how, when you grow up to be you say you're going to be a lawyer or a doctor or, whatever you want to be, a dentist, a fireman, a police person. But, we don't grow up to say we want to be an analyst, and so you've been a CMO, you've been in the startup business, a professor, an entrepreneur. Now, you're in the field of being an analyst and research director. So how did you get to where you're at that shaped, being where you are, and what drove you to be such a successful analyst?
That great question, Robert. I think very similar pathways, but I think everybody has got to have a lot of curiosity and be a lifelong learner to succeed in any field.
Yeah.
For me, having been a practitioner before has really helped me because, as you have been doing, we were buying software, fighting with vendors, watching promises break down as soon as they were implemented. So you develop a very different filter when you've been in the other side of the briefing room, right?
Well, that's actually a good point because you were on the other side when you were CMO. Did you use analysts for some of the things that you did, or did you learn at what point that the analyst community was something that you can contribute? Was it when you were CMO, or when was it?
That's a great question. Among the mistakes that I made sometimes was that the value of analysts I started getting to know very recently. Of course, you always wanted to be in the reports and things like that, but in a startup world, you're always worried about numbers. You're always worried about what's working and trying to repeat that. So we
Yep.
did have a few interactions with analysts, but I think we didn't do it the right way,
Yep.
is what I would say. Sometimes you're too early to be noticed by an analyst, and then you spend a lot of money and don't get any value out of that. Company has got to be ready.
Yeah, that's a really good point because when I was CMO for a previous company, I started to use the analysts because I felt that they were that unbiased viewpoint that I couldn't get anywhere else. And they told the truth. I kind of tell people that it's like the car and driver. If you're gonna go buy a new car, you look at car and driver for that unbiased viewpoint because they want to hear from the analysts what we think of the trends for all the vendors, with the buying patterns for the customers. It's actually, what does the sales journey look like for the buyers, and what does that look like for the vendors that are selling them? And I think it really helps out. But you spent many years in the startup world as well with established, different types of technology companies. What do you think of? Tell us a little bit about that, and what separates those organizations. That why were they successful, and what momentum did they have to carry through the years?
Yeah, and great. I just wanted to reiterate what you just said about best practices for using analysts. I totally agree with you that you get an independent, very credible opinion, and they don't have any skin in the game, you would say.
Right.
They're just there to tell you what the reality is. Now, working with startups, sometimes there's always a confusion about product market fit and business model fit.
Mhm.
Sometimes like founders will go and they love a customer who really likes what they build, raise the money, and then discover that they had no repeatable way to acquire the next 100 customers.
Right.
So companies that have the scale figured out first and they sell it, they care a lot about revenue retention. I think they are the ones who really do well. They have a sales motion, expansion motion. I've actually come across so many companies that don't even have the ability to upsell anything.
Yeah.
And I think your product should be so useful to people that they want more of it, right? So they forget about that.
Good point.
That way, I think today, if vendors can tell me, like, if they're accountable for an outcome that their product promises, right? We all get worried very fast.
That's a good point, because I think that the customers, their goal is outcomes. I'm not sure they really truly care about the technology. They care about the combination between the outcome and the technology, maybe outcome first, technology second, because they have to run their own business. And I've talked about this in the past. That's the important part. If production's down and they're only worried about using new technology, they won't be doing production. So the goal is, how does the technology and the people and the processes and the outcomes work together to keep on driving efficiencies? And that's where, even like the next question, so AI is dominating every technology question, every technology conversation and questions as well. But in your discussions with those vendors that you were speaking about, and also the buyers, that's one of the nice things about these events, that we get to see and talk to the buyers and get their feedback. So where do you see the biggest gap between AI expectations and business reality?
I think you'll probably agree with this, that the biggest gap is in the data layer first. I think vendors are selling intelligence, context, but buyers are sitting on unstructured, siloed, often ungoverned data.
Yeah.
That makes, whatever they sell unusable. So now you hear a lot of companies talking about agentic AI, right?
Yep.
So, the first question that people should ask is like, okay, if what is the first thing that your agent is going to touch, and how are we going to govern that, right?
Right.
That's one. There's also a skills gap that very few people are talking about. You hear about all these layoffs and everything, but I think good companies firmly believe there'll always be a human in the loop.
That's a good
Right.
point too.
Yeah, and the shortage of people who understand enough about the business process and then get influence like what AI can do is very less. I
Yep.
think you find a lot of silos there.
Yep.
So that's a risk, in my opinion. Right. Third one is like ROI.
Yep.
You probably hear this too. A lot of people just say like, "Hey, we need to implement AI."
Yep. All the time. Well,
so yeah,
we've talked about this, industry, 4.0, 5.0, 6.0, and 5.0. I tell companies about this, and it's basically the collaboration between humans and robots, talking to the point that you just made, that those humans need to be reskilled to be more strategic, right? So if you buy that, so if you're going to bring AI in, the data that you just spoke about is a big caveat, obviously. Governance is probably under discussed, which it should be almost ahead of data, because my security to my company is everything. And then how are we going to restructure the people that are working here to not feel intimidated by agentic AI, but also feel their role has been elevated because they're more strategic? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, like data, sometimes AI will actually help validate some of the data that you have.
Yeah.
Right. For example, I used to be in customer success a long time ago.
Yep.
Most people who are asked to fill up after a call, to fill up their ERP, CRM, whatever, they will choose the first or second box in the drop down, because sometimes the drop down is too less. Now, AI can actually help in that, because it can actually take the context from the call and say,
Yep.
like, okay, this call was about this. I was recently at the Verint conference, and one of the customers had this case study where it was a bank, and people were calling for account balance, and they were wondering, like, why not give them the account balance? But when they dug deeper into that, It was only because that was the first drop down that the data showed that many calls were about account balance, which was not true. Right.
Right.
Yes. So I think there is a big use of AI. People forget about the productivity that it can give, the decision making that it can empower. I think the focus on replacing human beings is totally unwarranted.
1,000. We have to get away from that, and we have to focus on the primary things, which is the data, the governance, and how it is used inside your business versus just saying, "Hey, we need it." But and I think that's a big point that you made earlier that said that companies just want to talk about, "Hey, we need AI," but no one knows exactly how we're going to use it. Um, so you participated in a lot of these briefings and events, and I actually enjoy those events because not only do I get to learn from the vendors, the customers, but also my peers, and I feel like you never stop learning, and it's fantastic, and that's why I kind of like to go to these events a lot. And so the technology companies, what they do best, and they do stuff that's different from one another's. But what do you think that the technology companies do differently when they're communicating strategy or vision and value to the analysts and customers? Because I feel like some of them sound the same and some of them sound different. So what's catching your eye the most?
I think the most important signal that I'm looking for in some of these briefings or analyst days is if the company can tell me what they decided not to do and
Wow,
why.
that's good.
Right?
That's
Yeah.
perfect. I like that.
Because they have to make trade-offs. Like they can be everything to everybody. So it's very happy when the CEO says that, hey, this is the reason why we chose not to serve, or some of the integrations that we decided to move. That reveals to me like the roadmap is genuine.
Wow. I
Yeah.
love that. So you don't have to give the vendor unless you want to, but give us an example of that because I feel like the companies that tell you what they decided not to do, there's some significant value of constructiveness and trust potentially at the same time. But tell us what you get out of it and what maybe an example.
I think there are two good examples. The Databricks conference, I think Ali Godse was very upfront. He gave 90 minutes to analysts, like
Yep.
CEO of a company like that. So that is a good example of hey, what we decided to do and what we decided not to do
Yep.
and why we moved the roadmap around. David Rhodes from Verint, I asked a question about like what are the other. You'll probably agree with this that categories are blurring. Every
Yep.
company seems to be doing something. So I did ask him some questions again on NDA. He was very upfront and answered that. I think that's the kind of transparency that you want. And
Yeah.
sometimes it doesn't have to be public. It can be on one-on-one conversations or
Yep.
one-to-many analyst conversations. So that was a good practice, I thought.
I think the vendors are in a position now where they have to gain trust, and talking like you just described is a kind of a big deal because they need to invest in more ability for trust with everybody that they're working with, the customers, the vendors that are their ecosystem, the analyst community, and just in general, because I think it's a one of those things where a lot of the vendors are starting to sound the same because they're focused on features and capabilities where the customer's looking to drive efficiency and outcomes. But as someone who studies technology, the markets every day, which you do, there's obviously some major shifts, and sometimes we need to go fast and sometimes we need to just slow it down and take baby steps. But these major shifts, what do you believe is the most that these technology leaders are underestimating right now?
I think the biggest thing that they are underestimating is the geographical concentration of AI infrastructure. And what I predict will be the shortage that is coming up of both compute and everything else.
Yep.
So that I think is a big problem that that people are underestimating. The second thing is the user interface is actually becoming very. I mean, you don't need to do so much UI, but everything is going to be very customized, right? So
Yep.
the interface is going to be a conversation with an agent. That is a different way of thinking about it than thinking about an organized way. I'm not saying UI is not important. I'm just saying that you're not going to be giving people like, here's a dashboard, log in and follow whatever we want users to do. I think the user gets to choose a lot more. One trend that I'm following, which sometimes concerns me, is uh, the models in other countries, right? Like some of the sovereignty part of it means that everybody is going to be siloed against each other.
Yep.
So if let's say if China can develop more open weight models, cheaper to run, US companies will want to use that.
Yep.
Now there are export restrictions on some of the newer models that are there. So I don't know where it's going to go, but I think token cost and trying to do things at a much not using a sledgehammer to nail something, I think is something that companies should watch out for.
Well, so if you're referencing pricing, I think through the tokens and the using of these of AI, I do feel there's not a good handle on it yet. And at the same time, the customers are a little bit concerned of how they're going to pay for it, because are you basing it on outcomes, and what is the, I guess, the explanation of what an outcome means. So I guess just to get your flavor of that, and we'll get into the next question after this. What's the best way to do it?
I think people think that AI was introduced when ChatGPT came out. Very wrong assumption. I think AI, we used to call it machine learning, has been around for 10, 15 years.
Mhm.
For example, image recognition, transcriptions were all services provided by AWS, by Microsoft, Azure, by Google Cloud, and they were much cheaper. Like you didn't have to worry about tokenization. They were also much more accurate because you just pointed it to your this thing. So
Yep.
now people jumping into the generative AI one is what is causing a lot of this. Now the tokenization for large companies, which is not always the case, of petabytes of data and managing that. Yes, you have to use analytical and predictive AI. But for generative AI, I think people jumping into large frontier models and using too many tokens, I think is a mistake.
Yeah, I agree. And it's kind of like you got to have to walk before you run. You don't have to go 0 to 100 overnight. Go 0 to 5 or 10, and just see how it all lays out. But the pricing, I think, is a issue at some point, because there's no definition or defined definition of how the best way for it to work, without the customers feeling that they have a handle on that. But we talk and you talk about headless, AI, and you've spoken with analysts, and you have other professionals that talk about it as well. So what's taught you in the industry a little bit more about it, and what do you think about it that's influenced you on what that is? And what do you think? Where do you think it's going? I kind of changed the question a little bit, what I originally was going to talk to you about, but tell us what you think about headless technology, and how that's reshaping things a little bit.
Uh, I think openness is much more today than before.
Mhm.
Integration is probably a bad word now. Connections are much more useful. And
Yeah.
I think progressive companies have realized the biggest thing about integration is let's not change the user behavior.
Yep.
Earlier, I think companies were a little bit, I'm trying to find the word, like they were not customer friendly. They said like everybody has to follow us. We are not going to worry about their experience. That has changed. Now
Of
I
course.
think people want a very seamless experience there. Now, as part of that, when it is open, and back to what we were discussing about, not having rigid dashboards and things like that, everything that you do is going to be very different. You're going to cater to humans and you're going to cater to agents. Like I'm planning a trip overseas. I don't have an agent, but whatever I'm doing is almost like an agent. Like I'm getting the information back to me without actually visiting anywhere else. So things like that are very helpful.
So what's an example of that? Just so we all understand a little bit more.
I think Google's summer release is going to be very disruptive, because if you want to buy a washing machine, you're going to say like, I want to buy a washing machine. These are my requirements.
I wanted to wash my clothes, but whatever.
But whenever the price is 675, if the model is what you recommended, buy it, right? Now, is everybody going to trust that? Probably not. But maybe they'll have a kind of filter which says that text me when you find that price.
Okay.
But later, you might trust a company for smaller things, right? You're not going to say, like, buy $1 million car or anything like that.
Right.
But I mean, everything. We didn't trust the internet for a long time. We didn't trust a lot of things, but that will build up slowly when there are enough guardrails and everybody sticks to the governance part of it. Right?
Well, how far away are you or we or the world from this becoming more, I guess, trustworthy, usable, concrete way of doing business? It seems like we're in a gap.
I think it's not a new thing. Like, for example, I use Capital One Travel because I've got their credit card. They kind of, their machine learning, I won't say AI, tells me what is the right time to buy and what is the right price to buy. They've
Okay.
not introduced a place where, because you have 24 hours, right? You can
Right.
cancel if you want. So that to me is a no-brainer decision. Like if the machine learning algorithm / AI makes a mistake, I've got the ability to reverse that, right? But companies like Cloudflare have introduced a way for your agent to buy small stuff. You're a developer, you want to buy API access for $2. You can't even put your credit card in because it's going to cost you more to put the credit card in.
Right.
So I think people will find use cases which are disaster proof.
That's the big key, I think. Disaster proof, and that's the direction. Do you think that we are going, and I believe this, that more of a platform base, more of a easier user interface, because you talked about that previously, an ecosystem that everything's a little bit easier for the users, where they're not having to have thousands of different applications. It's more focused and concentrated on them. And so if you take that and you kind of roll into this next question, if you're looking ahead in the next 5 years, if you believe what I just said or a variation of that, what advice would you give technology professionals, marketers, leaders who want to remain relevant as AI continues to reshape how organizations operate? What's your advice?
Yeah, so yesterday I was thinking about this question and something struck me like the best customer experience is when the customer never has to call you. And
Less trouble.
I have a few examples of all the things that companies that I actually invest more in, or like my bank or financial institution. And I never have to call their customer service. My insurance company, like all of these are easy for me to do. And they kind of, Google Fi is another great example. Now, companies can easily predict what pain I'm undergoing and actually reach out to me instead of me reaching out to them, right? Like a very classic example, I used to have a lot of respect for Uber. I probably still have. This may be a one-off, but I actually was cutting very close to my flight to Las Vegas last week, and the app wouldn't work. And imagine the stress that I was having. And it's easy for Uber with all their AI to be able to say, like, hey, let's call this customer, right? The app actually failed like 3-4 times. Now, that's where I think you have to think about the customer experience first, and you got to predict. And AI can be very good at predictions, right? So that's the kind of thing that people will say. It'd be good for not only customers, it'd be good for employees, because employees don't have to. I mean, the employee who answered my chat after that, I wasn't happy. I'm sure they weren't happy handling what I was doing, and we didn't get a resolution, right?
Oh,
And that's
really?
why I'm talking to you about a well-known company, well-known brand.
What did you shift to
I
Lyft?
used Lyft.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
God for alternatives, right?
Yeah. Well, competitive, landscaping in industry, keeps everybody balanced at the same time. But
Yeah, but I couldn't use the voucher that
that you had.
people who hosted me had, contracted with Uber. So I think that's a fail. And a fail of AI, it's a fail of everything.
So do we know what the failure was at the end of the day?
No, we don't.
Okay.
But
What
in
city were
my
you?
mind, when an app gives you an error message or it times out after some time, observability, how much of software that Uber is buying for all of these cases, right?
Yeah. Good point. Well, what city were you in, by the way?
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas. Okay. Well, that's an easy shift to go to Lyft or even get a taxi, but it shouldn't happen. And it's a shame that it did happen. But uh, what's your
Right.
advice for Uber to fix that next time?
Now, it's an interesting use case to mention Las Vegas, right? The taxis are the cheapest. They are the ones that you get the closest to the lobby.
Yep.
But because they want to safeguard them, you have to walk like almost a mile to get to where Uber is. So these are all real life examples, right? Like,
Well, Well, that's even a good caveat to. I actually used to work for a company out of France, and I would stay in this area called La Defense, and it was by where the office was. They would not, taxi drivers would not let the Uber drivers come close to where the hotel I was staying because they were in a dispute on a regular basis. But so I would have to walk to these strange areas and it was really uncomfortable. So I think that's a kind of an issue that Uber has with the destinations that they're at. And that's probably the situation that you're describing at the same time. But anyway, um, any comments on that before we close?
no, I think technology leaders should go beyond their software and go and look at the reality outside, right?
Yeah.
Like people, I mean, using phones, where are they? Are they in a noisy place? I think that way Microsoft has done a good job with its teams, like the sound filtering. I mean, people often on calls, you must have experienced this, will say like, hey, I'm going to go on mute because there is somebody mowing their lawn. But you'll say, I can't hear anything at all. So that's the kind of experience. But they're not good at sending that message because they do so many things, right?
Yeah, good point. Well, that's part of the platform of the ecosystem, how Microsoft has everything inherent in their different applications and the softwares that they provide for their customers. But Shashi, thank you for joining Kramer Talk. I really appreciate your time. Robert Kramer here. Thank you all very much for listening. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.